cities are really going to have to kind of treat their attempt to bring people to that city much more like marketing a consumer product.
If suddenly your offices are not there, if your property taxes are not giving you what they used to give you, I think San Francisco is a prime candidate to be like the Pittsburgh of our era.
This whole back to the office is kind of another yet attempt for the old way of looking at things.
I think we're moving from a linear to a non-linear economy. Oh, can you guys come back? Yeah, we know that it's not really convenient, but actually we have a lease for 2 more years.
We're moving from a command control type structure.
Today, the economy needs far fewer people to be really ambitious and excited, and it needs everyone else to just do whatever they want.
Well, hello, everyone. It's Jim O'Shaughnessy with yet another Infinite Loops. I said to my guest today before we started recording that we might, in fact, be brothers from different mothers because we are very aligned on many of our ideas about what is coming down the pike in terms of work, in terms of offices, in terms of everything the new economy is going to be. His name is Dror Poleg, who is an author. He's already written Rethinking Real Estate, which anticipated quite a bit of the current reshuffle. And he's currently working on After Office, taking a look at what the future holds for the way we work, how we work, where we work. And one of the cool things you're doing, like Dickens, you're serializing it for your premium subscribers. I think that's great. A lot of people didn't know that's how Dickens became a rock star. Dror, welcome.
Thank you, Jim. Amazing to be here and to meet my, my brother from another mother.
So your credentials are kind of like in the stratosphere. There's just so many things. You studied at the London School of Economics. You were at Instead. You served as a intelligence military for the Israeli military. You've lived in Australia, China, New York, all over the world. Wow. I think it's awesome. Oh, and in the meantime, you also found time to found a bunch of companies, give a lot of speeches, consult for a lot of big companies. Your most recent company that you founded, Height Free AI, loved the name. But today, I'd really like to talk about the work you've done around kind of the future of offices, the future of the economy, et cetera. You've said in your work that AI and remote work are really allies, and it allows work to be asynchronous. The idea behind digitizing work, et cetera, allows the worker of the future to work from anywhere, and really is going to be an amazing lever for the knowledge working class. Tell us a little bit about your thesis around offices and how it's evolved.
Wow, okay, that's a huge question. Maybe I'll just start with the relationship between AI and remote work. So, we had the kind of COVID lockdowns, everyone went home. The world is still trying to convince many of them to come back to the office. And before we managed to grapple with that, we are now in the midst of an AI boom of sorts, where everyone is both excited and somewhat fearful or apprehensive about the impact of AI. And these two things seem like sequential booms or unrelated booms, but they're very related, I think, in particular in their impact on the workforce, because in a way, remote work and the move towards digital collaboration basically set the scene for AI and made it much easier for AI to now step into the office because the office is not there and take on more human tasks. So our work became, particularly during COVID, more asynchronous, more digital, mediated through a variety of online collaboration tools, and also more kind of impact-based rather than presence-based on presenteeism-based. And basically, when all of our meetings are already digital, even if we are in the office, and all of our collaboration is through online tools that have their own APIs and databases, it's very easy for something like ChatGPT in its various incarnations to just step in and start to absorb more of that and start to act in this type of environment. Meanwhile, the better AI gets, the better online collaboration tools we are getting as humans. So it becomes easier for us. All of these tools are now being turbocharged, Google Sheets and Bing and Notion, but basically everything now is augmented by AI, as well as tools that really augment our presence. So during COVID, Google, for example, announced Project Starlight, these kind of like video calls that look like holograms, and you sit inside this huge booth, and then the other person sees you as if you're there. That looked cool enough, but you needed like a big booth, and it cost like $30,000. And a few months ago, they said, "Oh, now with generative AI, we can actually achieve more or less the same effect with just 3 cheap cameras that you put around your screen. So you don't need the booth anymore, because we don't really need to scan all of you. We just need to generate a hologram of you. And to do that, we don't really need all the stuff that we needed even like 18 months ago." And once AI makes it easier for us to collaborate more remotely, then more collaboration is being done digitally, and not just for textual-based work, but increasingly for more things that are more and more physical, so like developing things remotely in a much richer type of interaction. And again, then the cycle goes on and on. So more AI, more remote work, more AI.
Yes, and they're self-reinforcing trends that contribute to one another. It's kind of like the Starlight. We've created the holodeck, and maybe this is version 1.0. But man, version 5.0 is going to rock and roll, right?
Yeah.
One of the things that you've written about is the impact on offices and cities. And as I was getting ready for our conversation, I was reminded of conversations I've had over the last, say, month with something that surprised me. And it was this. I live in the New York City metro area, as do you. And I've talked to no less than 6 incredibly creative talents who are making use of everything we're going to talk about. In other words, they're scaling using the collaborative tools, they're knowledge workers, etc. And all 6 of them told me that they were moving to New York City. Well, talk to me about why that is so.
Yeah, we're getting a bit ahead of ourselves, but we'll come back to the reasons kind of like of what's driving this. But I think one analogy I like to look at for the impact of the internet and technology on kind of everything is starting with looking at the impact on digital media. So, on MP3s and videos, and to see what happened there. Now, when this internet thing came into our lives, mid-90s, after a few years of looking at what it does, Chris Anderson came out with The Long Tail, a really remarkable and important book. And the gist of it was that, the internet will have a democratizing force on media. So there'll be more people consuming more diverse types of content, fewer hits. So if we had like an 80-20 kind of thing before the internet, now the internet is going to democratize it somewhat. At least that's how people characterize this book. Actually, his argument is a bit more sophisticated than that. But the general idea was, okay, now everyone has access, both as a producer of content and as a consumer of content. So more people, like the distribution will be more equal. The world will be democratized. What actually happened is exactly the opposite, and some of what he described as well. So the world now, if you look at online, at videos or at music, is actually much more concentrated at the head of the distribution than it was. So about 0.5% of all of the streams, I think, on Spotify generate about 90% of all the listens. So it's no longer 80-20, it's like 0.5-90. At the same time, people are listening to many more types of music and watching many more types of videos. And there are more people that are making a living from being creators of various kinds. But there are many more people who are trying to make a living, and they're not making a living at all. Now, when you try to apply this to the world of locations, you basically say, okay, let's say that everyone now has a choice in terms of where they want to go, just like everyone has a choice in terms of what they listen to. And I expect something somewhat similar is going to happen here as well. So the biggest hits are going to become bigger than ever, because in a world with infinite choice, first you gravitate towards the things that you've heard about and that you know about, and there's network effects at play. And at the same time, there is also going to be a long tail or a fatter tail of locations that suddenly become relevant for people with high-end jobs that weren't relevant before, just because these people basically were not allowed to live in those places. So I think we are going to see both. which means those that are at risk are those that are in between, the cities that are kind of large but not large enough, or even very large but like don't have any unique characteristics, or are struggling to make that adaptation. Because even New York City, it's nice that some people are moving there, and it's true, but it still didn't figure out how to accommodate that in terms of, how to readjust the tax base away from offices, more towards residents, how to capture the income of people that kind of come here for a few months at a time and then go somewhere else. And to figure that out and to adapt even the physical environment to that takes time, and it takes policy changes. And some cities are not going to make it, basically, during that transition. And it also creates an opportunity for some new cities and some new locations to emerge and suddenly become much more relevant than they were in the previous paradigm, let's say.
So let's continue down that path for a minute. Which cities do you see as emerging as the ones who will successfully navigate this new world? And when you talk about them, if you could give examples of what they're doing that maybe other cities could mimetically copy.
Yeah.
And then also the other side, which cities are you seeing are like just not getting it? They're just not changing.
So it's hard to say which ones are going to make it, because again, all of them still have a lot of work to do. But I'd say the classic kind of dichotomy is New York versus San Francisco. So New York City, to begin with, is lucky because it has a lot of characteristics that make it very attractive, regardless of whether you have to work there or not. Again, it's very walkable. It has a lot of culture. It has very strong public transport, at least in American terms. So it has all of that. The adjustment will be, again, in terms of how do you still finance the stuff if suddenly your offices are not there, if your property taxes are not giving you what they used to give you, if all of the retail that you have is based on the assumption that a certain amount of people come in every day at 9 a.m. and go back at 5 p.m., that requires some adjustment. And of course, that has its own impact on the tax base, because a lot of the taxation comes from local retail and sales tax. But New York seems to be moving in the right direction. So first, it has the built-in characteristics already that enable it to be attractive. But it's saying a lot of the right things in terms of, okay, we are going to help people convert offices to other things, and we are going to close some streets to make them more walkable. We're going to give up some on-street free parking and turn that into outdoor dining. We're going to invest more in education and other things that make the city attractive, particularly compared to its suburbs, which pulled all of these people away over the last decades. So it's saying and doing a lot of those right things, and I think it's going to be okay. But the question is how painful the transition will be. On the other hand, and of course, one last thing, New York's economy is very diverse to begin with in terms of the industries that it depends on. And it has been going through a transition for since forever. Depends whether you want to look at it, but even the last 15 years in terms of finance and how important it is or isn't to New York, it's declined quite significantly. And tech became the largest employer in New York, depending how you calculate, but arguably even before COVID. And a lot of finance jobs just disappeared into the ether, or moved to New Jersey, or moved farther afield, to, I don't know, South Carolina or Florida and beyond. Then you have cities like San Francisco, which are, first of all, much more of a kind of one-trick pony, incredibly dependent on a single industry, a much smaller city to begin with, so not very attractive in many ways. Obviously, it has culture and it has some nice walkable areas, but not as much as New York, and not the diversity that New York has. And it has a government that, at least until now, seems intent on not contending with reality. The one cash cow that it has to be as hostile to it as possible. And again, and not to enforce basic things to do with, personal safety and crime and education and all sorts of things like that. So I think, and I'm not saying this will happen, but I think San Francisco is a prime candidate to be like the Pittsburgh of our era, or something like, a city that, or the Buffalo, a city that was like incredibly important once upon a time. And 80 years later, nobody like even remembers why, at least unless they study history. So it has the potential to go down that path. Yeah, in terms of general advice for cities, I think to loosen zoning laws, to really let people streamline construction of whatever they want and conversion of whatever they want. And by loosening zoning laws, I don't mean don't regulate, government is bad. I mean change the approach. There's other approaches to zoning which look at the actual impact of a building, like does it make noise, does it pollute, how does it impact, you can enforce all of that. But to try to say in advance, okay, here we'll have offices, here we'll have apartments, here we'll have medium-term hospitality, here we'll have short-term hospitality, here there'll be retail. And to plan all of that 50 or 30 or even 10 years in advance is just not possible anymore. It was definitely easier in the 20th century, but even then, I think zoning laws from 100 years ago, still, we pay a high price for them, even before COVID, but definitely after COVID. I think, and maybe this can be our next topic, I think we're moving from a linear to a nonlinear economy. And in such a nonlinear economy, obviously the biggest challenge is for the built environment, which is naturally ossified and rigid, to adapt to that and to enable, good lives and prosperity for everyone.
Yeah, I think before we do move to linear versus non-linear, because I love that topic, and I think you're spot on with a lot of your analysis. What are your thoughts about, like, Saudi Arabia, for example, still has a mega building project called NEOM. What do you think of that?
It's funny. I'm supposed to go there in a few days, and I'm kind of thinking what I want to tell them about it, to speak at a conference about like new cities and technology and the built world. I think I like to support builders. So whoever's building something and has crazy ideas, I'm not going to be the first one to like go against it or make fun of it. That said, I think the best cities emerge organically, or at least, again, they leave a lot of room for organic growth. So, I mean, you can build the railway lines, you can set up the infrastructure. But even with a line, I'm not sure if mathematically is the optimal way to build a city. It probably isn't. But more importantly is how they zone the uses within that. I think when you dive into that project, obviously a line, it looks very narrow, but actually, I don't know when it will actually get to the full length that they're showing there. But it seems like a pretty thick kind of line. So even like a little chunk of it, you can build an interesting neighborhood within that and then grow to the sides if you must. But to me, it's more interesting, what do you do within each of those squares, let's say. So again, the diversity of uses that you enable, the empowerment of the actual users and people there to choose what they do with that space in terms of, whether it's going to be housing or office or a mix. So yeah, if I were to plan a new city, I wouldn't plan it that way. Let's put it quite simply. But it's almost impossible to plan a city at all. So, I mean, if you have to build one, it's not like there's a lot of other models that I would look at and say, okay, this is perfect, let's do it that way. I mean, so it might look exceptionally bad in terms of how rigid or far away from convention it is. But I think every effort to plan a city is doomed to fail, more or less. I mean, the optimal way is to let them emerge and to double down on whatever seems to work. But I also appreciate that in the developing world, sometimes, you have to build new cities from scratch and you have to try to leapfrog certain processes. I spent a decade in China, and part of my job was to decide where we want to build shopping malls and offices. And 50% of my work was visiting dozens of new cities or old cities every year, meeting with the government there, hearing their plans about, again, a whole new city, or at least a whole new section of a city, which is basically a city, a place to house 500,000 or 1 million people, and to figure out when it makes sense and when it doesn't make sense. And some of them made sense and worked, and some of them didn't work. So it's not that you can't do it. But almost part of the process is that you're necessarily going to overshoot in certain places. You're going to build a lot of stuff that people don't want. You're going to miss a lot of basic things that, a city that develops organically has, and you're not going to have because you kind of forgot about it, whether it's parks or room for retail or room for schools or whatever it is that someone forgot to plan appropriately for. But still, it has to be done. So, I mean, I like that people are experimenting. with the line and Neom in particular, my favorite thing about it is actually that they're thinking about it a bit like a charter city. So like having different rules and regulations from the rest of the country, allowing people even socially to experiment. And that I do like. But there's a lot of work to do. I'm particularly excited about cities in the Middle East because, I was born in Israel, and I watch with dread the evolution or devolution of that part of the world. And I feel like it has so much potential, so many young people, so many resources, so much money. And, it deserves better. And I think urbanism and planning can play a big part in that, in connecting people and bringing people together. Basically, the classic role of cities of, being some sort of a melting pot, not in some kind of romantic, idealistic way, but just in terms of pure greed. People have something to gain from partnering with each other, doing things together. And I do believe that, when things are not so terrible economically, then most people kind of chill and they don't want to go and blow themselves up or start wars or hate anyone. And they can even hate anyone, but just without blowing, the French and Germans hate each other still, but it's fine. But they don't do, but they're not at war, and that's okay. They don't have to love each other. And if they can live together, I think, the Jews and Arabs and Persians and everyone else there can probably get along as well. So I'm interested in that. And those type of projects from that angle in particular.
Yeah. And, another part of this that seems to be kind of an overarching theme that at least I've seen and is part of my thesis, that affects not just cities or how they're built and how they're planned, but the economy in general, social relationships, etc. We are coming off of a period where everything was designed for the mass, the middle, right?
Yeah.
If you look at a bell curve, the 68% in the middle dominated everything, right? And the old thinking, you could see it. Like I was thinking as I was getting ready, I read almost a decade ago a series of articles written by the author Walter Mead. Mm-hmm. And he was putting it in particularly political terms, red state versus blue state.
Yeah.
And one of the insights that he had that I really paid attention to was he was way ahead of the other thinkers, saying the blue states have models that are not sustainable. Under the new way of doing things, the way they've done their tax raising, the all of that, can be disrupted immediately.
Yeah, if a few thousand people pick up and leave, then yeah.
Exactly. And so you've also written about the idea that cities are really going to have to kind of treat their attempt to bring people to that city much more like marketing a consumer product.
Mm-hmm.
And so I want to talk about that a bit as well. But I also want to get your thoughts on, I watched this whole back to the office argument. And we moved in the firm that I sold, O'Shaughnessy Asset Management. We moved to work from anywhere at the beginning of the pandemic and made it permanent. At my new company, we're definitely work from anywhere, but we do have spaces that actual physical spaces that I want to talk to you about as well. Can you steel man an argument for back to the office? Because what I've seen just seems so horribly bad and thin-eared.
So, I'm not the one making that argument, but if I have to steel man it, I think any way to work is legitimate and good as long as it's tied to an actual purpose. So, for example, when Elon said everyone at Twitter has to come back and, I expect you to sleep on a mattress I was like, okay, that's actually cool. This guy, this is war, okay, he took one of the most important companies in the world. He wants to make sure that only people that really care about it are going to be there. It's definitely in crisis. It's losing money. It has debt. This is a good reason that, if you're excited about the product and about the mission, come here and sleep on the floor. And I'm going to be here with you, Elon Musk. And, we're going to do shit that you can't do anywhere else. Okay, that makes sense. But then I see a lot of other companies saying, oh, can you guys come back? yeah, we know that it's not really convenient, but actually we have a lease for 2 more years. So after that, we're going to reevaluate. But in the meantime, that's like, why would I come back for the? I don't care that you have a lease. Like, what does that have to do with my job? Or some companies are even telling employees, listen, we're going to now call you back to the office. The official new policy is that you have to be here 4 days a week, but we're not going to enforce it. So, and they're telling people explicitly that. So, that seems ridiculous. It's basically you're treating people like kids, or you're acknowledging that even you're like not in charge and not empowered as a boss and have no idea why they should be there or for what reason. And just because, inertia or sunk costs or whatever. So again, I do think that there's reasons to come back to the office, but it has to be tied to your mission and have a specific purpose. But beyond that, yeah, it doesn't. I also think that those questions of, everyone back or everyone working from home, to me, the answer is not like one or the other. It's more about probably you should empower people to do whatever works best for them, or at least at the team level, and kind of see what works. And maybe, again, certain ways of working will emerge that you can then apply across the whole company, or nothing will emerge and you'll just see, okay, different teams like to work differently. And as long as it works, then good. Or I can start moving people from one team to another based on where I think they would fit better in terms of the work style and the culture. Yeah, so that it comes back even to what we just discussed about zoning. The notion that you can know in advance who do you need, where, at what point in time, is becoming hard to justify. And this young CEO, I think in 1990 already, a long time ago, a fellow called Steve Jobs, in one of the interviews, he said that, we're competing in a very dynamic environment, and we constantly have to shift people around and kind of coalesce into different teams, work on different projects, work under different managers all the time. But we can't do that physically because we can't move people around the country, and we can't even move them within the building because it's so inconvenient. So we're creating a digital organization, he called it. We start to collaborate through all sorts of tools, and then we can kind of assign people in a more kind of on-demand or ad hoc manner to where their skills would be best matched with the task at hand at that given moment. And that's how we innovate. And I think the same dynamic is increasingly applying to the rest of the economy and to more and more companies.
I agree. In fact, we're doing a series on it, which we call the Great Reshuffle. And one of the components of that is we are moving from a command control type structure, very hierarchical, very top down. What I used to joke that if I suddenly woke up and I was in a room filling out endless forms and the walls were covered with 24-hour news cable channels, I knew that I was in hell. And yet it seems to me that this whole back to the office is kind of another yet attempt for the old way of looking at things, right? Which came from a place of scarcity, which came from a place of top-down decision-making, as opposed to the far more effective, in my opinion, bottom-up, which is how complex adaptive systems work. And the economy is certainly a complex adaptive system. And I just wonder, you've said the office is the embodiment of standardized linear structures, a spiritual battle against individualism. And I was really struck by that because I used to, when I was walking in New York City and I would look into some of these offices, I would just turn to my wife, who I usually was walking with, and say, it's soul crushing, right? And like, she would always look at me like, what are you blathering on about? But it seems to me that now we are in a place where, as you mentioned earlier, output is becoming increasingly nonlinear, and jobs, I'm making air quotes here for our voice only listeners, are not going to be jobs at all. I think your thesis there is fascinating. So if you wouldn't mind outlining that for our listeners.
So, in the industrial world, there was a very clear link between input and output. You take some raw materials, you take some labor, you take some capital, you put them in the blender, in the factory, in the corporation itself, and something comes out on the other end, and you can know relatively well, okay, what is going to come out, how many units, how much did they cost me to produce, and even to a certain extent, how can I market them? Now, of course, there was competition, there were difficulties. I'm not saying, everything was easy back then, but that was the production side. Then there was the marketing side, which was also much simpler. There were 1 or 2 TV channels, 2 or 3 newspapers. So, if you wanted to sell soap, you go and produce a soap opera, and then you sell soap. Basically, the people who buy the soap are going to watch it, and you're going to sell your soap. And maybe your competitors will do the same. Okay, so you'll have 2 competitors or 3, and you'll kind of, best case, you can even, conspire with them. And worst case, you'll just compete, and then all of you will make money probably anyway. Today, increasingly, you put stuff into the machine, and you don't really know what's going to come out on the other side. I mean, the best examples of that, again, is in online media, where, some Korean guy somewhere has a video of him jumping in the street, and suddenly he reaches 1 billion views before anyone else. While, I don't know, some American production company sends 200 people to work on something for 5 years, and nobody cares to watch it. So, because whatever we do is mediated through all these complex social dynamics and all these algorithms that suddenly boost winners in unpredictable ways. And there are 2 aspects here. One is that more and more of the stuff that we consume is content itself. So we pay for content, whether if directly or indirectly. So again, it's not things anymore. So it's definitely not made the way things used to be made. But the second part is that whatever it is that you're selling, even if it's real estate or a car, it's all mediated through the same social media and the same dynamics and the same viral loops as everything else. So it still depends on those dynamics. Even though you can make the car maybe and know that you'll get a car on the other side, you don't know whether anyone will care about this car. Plus, we're in a world where even making a car today, there's a lot of companies in a lot of countries that are making them. And of course, a car is an extreme example, but almost any other product, I can go to Alibaba and just get that product. And then the question is really, what kind of story can I put on top of this product? And how do I break through the nose to sell this product? It's not about whether I can make it. It's about whether I can get anyone to pay attention to me. So again, that means an environment that is much less predictable, much more dynamic, much more prone to like winner take all or winner take most effects, and yeah, much more asymmetrical in terms of like the size of who gets to win, how big they were to begin with, and how big they can become. And also a world where success is very fleeting. So I mean that even if you're successful, you don't know if you'll be successful again tomorrow or the next day, and something can come and kind of overshadow you very quickly. A world that is very similar to showbiz, to how superstars, both superstar kind of firms and superstars people have existed. But now these dynamics are starting to govern more and more of our jobs and more of our lives. And in the past, when you would think of what to study or what to be when you grow up, your parents would tell you, go be an accountant or a doctor or, something like a good profession, basically, that you'll always have a job. And also these professions tended to be constrained or protected by geography in some way. That like, every town needs a doctor. You don't have to be the best doctor. If you live there, then you're going to make a living. Or every town needs an accountant. But now, so then you had a choice. You probably said, no, I want to be a soccer player. I want to be in the NBA. I want to be a rock star. And your parents would tell you, no, those professions are bad because most people don't make money in those professions. But those that make money make a lot of money. But your odds are that you're not going to make anything. And you could make the choice. I think today, increasingly, we don't have that choice. Whatever professions you go into are going to be governed by the same power laws, by the same dynamics of the economics of superstars, where even if you're an accountant and you think you chose the most boring job in the world, suddenly you're competing both with low wage earners in anywhere in the world, and with the best possible accountant on earth that suddenly created some kind of scalable business, and he's competing with you and taking customers away from you. So it's a tough world to live in, I think, with much less certainty, but also much more opportunity.
Sort of power laws define everything around us now. Yeah. And one part of our thesis is that there will be, just as you say, the power law will be almost ironclad and there will emerge the huge winners. But we also think that the length of the tails are going to provide lots of niche opportunities
Yep.
where people can, like, I always use fishing as my example because I made a disastrous decision because I didn't understand that people love fishing. And I got pitched an app that was a fishing app
Mhm.
pre-pandemic. And I'm kind of looking at the guy over lunch and he's showing it to me and I'm like, I just don't get this at all. And of course, what I didn't get was the number of aficionados of fishing, how it actually was incredibly elegant because not only did it let them brag, look at the fish I just caught,
Yeah.
it also had a social aspect because you could geolocate where they caught the fish,
Mhm.
and then people would swap stories, et cetera. And it went on to be an incredibly successful app.
Mhm.
And I think that there are so many niches where that can now happen. We finally have the tools, we finally have the networks that will allow sort of niche interests, bizarre, crazy
Yeah.
stuff that will emerge as like, God, how did they ever think of that?
I still feel like I underestimate the scope of the internet, like the number of people that exist that could pay for almost anything as long as you tell the right story. I'm always amazed that I make a living, by being mostly an online entity that just writes. And I'm not a celebrity, I'm not terribly famous, I don't have a huge number of followers, but I make a very nice living, even though almost anyone never heard of me. And I know personally hundreds of other people who do the same thing in a variety of fields, and there's tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of people like that in the world already. And at some point, the niche or the niche even becomes the person itself, in terms of how you explain the material, how you frame it. People just want to get it from you rather than get it from someone else. So it's not even just about defining the specific market or what you're actually selling, but it's even down to like your voice, your attitude, the type of jokes you make. Uh, so it's not that it becomes entertainment, but it's specific enough because there's enough options for people that they can choose the exact person that they want to tell them about the specific topic that interests them. And I think it's incredible in terms of opportunity. But it's a life that comes with a lot of anxiety and uncertainty as well. At the same time, I also feel like, wow, how can I make such a nice living, get paid so much to come and give a talk, and still I feel like, oh, maybe in a week nobody will want to ever speak to me again, and I feel like at the mercy of all these powers and algorithms that I have no control over, and suddenly someone changes something, and I'm like, oh shit, now I have to come up with a different strategy. It's very stressful, and so I think 10 years ago, people who are in the same income bracket as me were much calmer, I think, in terms of their approach to life. I still feel like constantly like I'm about to lose everything, even though the evidence says otherwise. So, yeah. But I think that feeling is going to be more prevalent. Like that's something that more and more people are going to feel. I feel like I'm living in the future a little bit in that sense.
That's very insightful because it also helps explain the kind of mind viruses that are going around right now. And they do seem to be based on the insecurity. In the old days, you got the gold watch, you stayed at the same company for however many years, you climbed the ladder, 9 to 5, you went home. The work you did was not only contingent on where you lived, it was pretty highly contingent on where you lived, right? Pretty hard to change your physical zip code. And then we've moved to a world where it's super easy to change your digital zip code. And the other thing that we now have, the internet is the greatest variance amplifier in human history.
Right.
And so the uncertainty, the stress, the anxiety, how do you think that's going to play out?
I think one, it's amplified or intensified by what's happening outside the internet. The housing costs, the quality of public services that we have or don't have. Again, general inequality and the feeling, particularly in the New York Metro, you feel like, you can make $500,000 a year and you feel kind of poor, or at least you feel kind of insecure, which is true. I mean, people who don't live here cannot really grasp what the hell, like disconnected the kind of statement that was. But it's true because at the end of the day, you're competing with people like, because we're on a power law slope, even if you're in the 99th percentile or the 99.3 percentile, there's still tens of thousands of people that are ahead of you, and sometimes far, far ahead of you, and are competing for the same resources, the same doctor, the same school, the same parking lot, the same everything. And I just read, that last year in America, 13,000 weddings cost more than $1 million. So, that's $13 billion spent on wedding, but just on that. And again, so it sounds like a lot, but when you look at it statistically, you're like, okay, there's, I think, 2 million weddings in America every year. So yeah, 13,000 is really 0.06% or so. So yeah, of course, it makes sense. Statistically, it will be like that. So statistically, it makes sense. But when you translate it to the real world, you're like, wow, there's 13,000 people. So like probably a third of that is in New York. So every week in New York, there's like a few dozen weddings that cost $1 million. And whoever else wants to get married now has to compete against them, pulling all the resources away. And again, that's what you have to compete with, unless you're on the other end of the spectrum and you're not even close to these people. But if you're close enough to them, you're competing with them. So it's so it's very stressful. I think society will have to adapt, to come up with new social support system, safety nets, psychological and religious stories that people tell themselves to make them comfortable with where they are and with the risk associated with it. And hopefully, because it is all driven by technology one way or another, then maybe technology can also help. Again, maybe some things will become incredibly abundant and simple and cheap, and it will be worth it. It will lessen the anxiety because we'll know that we have access to amazing healthcare and that we have access to, I don't know if universal basic income, we can talk about that, but like at least a certain level of service that I'm like, yeah, okay, because most people, I think, don't want to be the richest person in the world. I know I don't, but they want to have some security and safety. And I think the more it moves up the curve, the less sense it makes. I mean, if people in the 99th percentile in America feel insecure economically, then I think you have a problem. And hopefully technology can help fix that. I think we're right at the tail end, I hope, of a period where technology mostly helped cause a lot of that, but without fixing it completely yet. I think even stepping away from the internet, I think a lot of the bad policy that we've seen over the last few decades was also enabled by technology, even things like low interest rates for the last 15 years. I think without technology and globalization, basically, it just wouldn't have been possible. I think the deflationary power of technology was largely absorbed by that policy, which is why we kind of didn't see inflation until now, because without it probably would have had some significant deflation. I mean, with globalization and tech, it also enabled all the crazy wars of the 21st century, particularly the American initiated ones, which again, I think without the tech boom, probably the government would have had to go back to the public sooner and say, okay, this is costing us a lot. Do you really want to finance it? Here are the trade-offs. And probably a lot of people would have said earlier, oh, no, actually, this is not that important. But like when you can finance it without people noticing, then, it takes a long time until it becomes an economic issue. And by the time it does, probably people don't remember the link to the war or to any actions anyhow, because it happens 15, 20 years later, as it is happening now. But I hope that in the future we'll kind of see what technology can do for the better also. So like, okay, we paid the price, I feel, in a way, in terms of the demolition of a lot of old structures. But now show us what you got, man. give us abundance, basically. And I'm optimistic that we might see that. I mean, that we have a good chance, and also that we have no choice. We have to make that bet because this is all we got. So we can't turn things back. So, yeah.
I agree wholeheartedly with that assessment. My concern is, like, we're going up against our base programming, our base human OS, where humans are essentially mimetic creatures, and we tend to compare ourselves. In the old days, we compared ourselves to who was around us, right? Like we had a limited group of people, a limited group of friends. Or family, etc., and the comparisons, they were probably closer to us. in the age of Instagram and Twitter, or X, as Elon likes to call it, and
Terrible
Facebook,
decision.
and yeah.
The best company name on the internet, Twitter. Just leave it alone.
But now we're comparing ourselves, as you put it, with superstars, right? And that kind of crushing insecurity. Like I thank God I don't compare myself with Brad Pitt or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And so what do you think about like are we battling our base code here, where prestige, comparison, like you'll endlessly see people say, which choice you're going to make. Well, you have a job, you can double your compensation from 100,000 to 200,000, but all of your colleagues are going to go from 100,000 to, and everyone picks the one where they do better comparatively, not absolutely. What do you think some of the solutions for that, given the technology platforms, given the leverage they give us?
So I think
how are we solve that?
Part of it, technology solves on its own. That we're bombarded with so much information and so many images that we're completely desensitized, and whatever we see, we don't know if it's real or fake, or we don't care, or we can make ourselves look like we're billionaires. So we just don't take it in as much as we would, if 50 years ago someone would publish, I don't know, how the Kennedys live or something, and people will be outraged. Now it's kind of like, whatever. Like, I've seen 100 of these a day. So people just don't get excited. And I think Trump is an example, a negative one of that. We're kind of like, when he said he can shoot someone on Fifth Avenue, I kind of believe him, because it's like, yeah, okay, another thing that someone's going to say about someone. At some point, it doesn't matter how bad you are. If people say it enough times, then nobody listens anymore, unfortunately. So I think there's that. Second, I do think, so here we're getting, it's almost like behavioral economics, what you just described, is like, okay, people prefer to get paid more than someone else rather than just get paid more in absolute terms and have what they want. And I think often, and of course we ascribe it to our Neanderthal brains or something like, or like some natural instinct that it is. And we assume that there's something irrational about it. But I think that often these kind of instincts are more rational than we think, which gives me hope, because I think in this current environment, it is actually correct to not, to choose the option where you still earn more than the other people, because it is kind of a zero-sum game. So again, like here in New York, you can choose to make $500,000 a year, but there'll be 1,000 other people that make $50 million a year. That's going to be a real problem for you. It's not just going to be like, oh, okay, I'm making $500,000 a year. Who cares? Because it is, to a certain extent, a zero-sum game. We're competing for the same land, the same limited or declining public services. So it is a problem for me. But if you change that equation, the environment where we're in, where I'm like, yeah, I know, I'm going to still get amazing medical care. I'm still going to get great education. I'm still going to have a place to live. So yeah, I don't care what, then it will be rational for me to choose otherwise. So I see the merit in that kind of animal brain choice as well. And I feel like if you change the incentives around people and you turn it from a zero-sum game to a truly, positive-sum game, then many people will respond differently. And already, I think America, it's kind of a cause for optimism how bad things already are, and no one's burning down the country with pitchforks. That you're kind of like, people have a lot of reasons to get angry now already. And if they can put up with this, hopefully where we're going, it's going to be a little better in absolute terms for every individuals, and people are going to be okay with it. I think some people will want more, and it's on us as a society to make sure they have avenues to go and get more, and to feel like they're able to get more, and that, that they have a choice, that they have a chance. Because I think that's the other side of it, not just in terms of who has what, but in terms of everyone having a feeling that the American dream is alive, that, that if you are ambitious, then you can go and become whoever you want, basically, in this country and in this world. So I think that's another important aspect of it. I also think it's kind of a related issue. We talk a lot about the incentive problems, and if you give people everything, suddenly no one will want to work and no one will be as motivated and there'll be no innovation. I actually think that most humans already are not so ambitious. And many of those that are the most ambitious, money on its own is not really the main thing that is driving them. And that even if you give everyone everything, those people, or at least some people, are still going to be as ambitious as before, but maybe everyone else will be happier. And this is something also that wasn't true 100 years ago, because 100 years ago, the economy needed everyone to be ambitious, at least to a certain extent. It needed everyone to wake up in the morning and go work in the factory for 40 years. But today, the economy doesn't need anyone to do that anymore. It needs far fewer people to be really ambitious and excited, and it needs everyone else to just do whatever they want. And whatever they want doesn't mean to do nothing. I think it serves an economic purpose, where this is how we're going to discover new things that we actually want to sell and buy from each other. And it's happening on the margins of the economy already, where people are just coming up with new stuff and they're selling each other stuff. The most extreme examples of it, like most things that emerge, are like in adult entertainment or things related to that, where people just pay other people to do all sorts of weird things, not even sexual often, just like give them attention or mention their name or write their something, stuff that like, okay, someone's paying for it, or like, yeah, someone's paying for it. And that's the job of the future, because that's what, there's demand and there's supply, and good. And two people here found, someone found something to spend on, and someone found something productive to do with their time or skills or traits or whatever it is that they're selling. And we're only going to discover more of those jobs of the future through letting people just basically do whatever they want, while a minority takes care of the hard, the hard, energy, infrastructure, healthcare, etc. So, and again, I'm not implying that we should specify who belongs to which caste or minority. I'm saying this is an order that is emerging already, and everyone is free at any given moment to work less or to work more, or to be as ambitious as they like. I'm just saying that I think the incentive questions of 100 years ago are very different from the ones of 20 years from today.
Totally agree. And one of the themes that you talk about is that essentially, again, with AI becoming ubiquitous, and I think it will, and I think that mostly that's for the good. One of the things that we're going to need is more training data. And, the really excellent data sets are pretty much, well, they're not exhausted, because we haven't gotten to a lot of private data sets that companies maintain. But the big companies, one of your themes is, listen, big companies, it will now be in their interest to pay people to play games or generate content, because the value to the big company actually is as the data set and new training data, right? And so a lot of things that seem crazy to people, actually, when you look at it through your lens, are incredibly smart. Talk a bit about that.
Yeah, so we already live in a world where we've all made this deal with the devil, or with multiple devils, where we're going to spend our time, generate data, generate content, and in return, you're going to give us free services. I can, call anyone in the world for free on WhatsApp or on Facebook. I can make video calls. I can consume content for free. I can just be entertained for free. But in return, again, I'm going to upload my own content, and maybe even more valuable, I'm going to provide constant feedback about thousands of other bits of content every day. I'm going to like it, share it, ignore it, hover over it, whatever it is that you can measure, I'm going to do to it, and you're going to take that and optimize your business with it. So we already have that bargain set up. I think over time, this bargain will become more explicit, basically saying, hey, you do this, there's value in that, we're going to pay you to do that. And we're going to do our thing and try to sell based on the insights that we generate from your data. We're going to sell it to other people who actually have money. And here also, it's part of those power laws are coming back, where, in the world of gaming already, I think 5 or 10 or whatever it is, 15% of all the in-game purchases on the Apple App Store are from, I don't know what, 5% of the users or 2% of the users. So, but to make the game good for them, everybody else has to play the game and to help the game become better and interact. both socially, so a bit like in nightclubs, where you let all the women in for free and give them free drinks in order to sell to the a bunch of guys that want to spend a lot of money because they don't care and they're driven by these very basic natural instincts. But also in terms of improving the product itself, that the product depends on constant feedback and the generation of data of various kinds. And so in order to sell to those 2% of consumers, you need everyone else to play the game. We've seen in crypto, during the last boom, I know you were there as well, some experiments with that as well, of like that pay to play, how could that even work? So we saw some ways of doing that. Obviously, they didn't survive. But I think they were interesting experiments, and I think they help tell you something about where the world is going. So yeah, and I think, like you said, it might sound very radical and then kind of surprising. But at the end of the day, if you look at the world as it already is, if you were a farmer in the year 1910, and I would show you my life, you would think, okay, 90% of what people do is like bullshit. Like, what are these people doing? Like, this guy is walking that guy's dog, and this is a lactation consultant, and this is a therapist for pets, and this is, and even the actual office work, 80% of it, like, where did all this paper come from? What are these people actually doing and filing and analyze, is this really necessary? Is this really work? Like, what are you guys really doing? So I think we're really good at making up stuff for ourselves to do. And I think we're going to stay really good at that. But I think less of that will happen in offices, and it will look less and less like what we call work. But as long as someone pays for it, or that it generates any economic value for the system as a whole, then it's work and it's necessary. So yeah, fun times ahead.
Yeah, and the other thing that I like to do is I like to listen to the market, right? And you mentioned farm workers. Well, if that was an idyllic life, why did they all do anything they could to move to cities and get factory jobs? Because the facts of the matter were farming was fucking hard, and it was boring, and it was isolated. And, it served its purpose clearly, but as technology evolved, humans voted with their feet, and they came, and yes, were some of the conditions on the Lower East Side of Manhattan horrible? Yeah, like Upton Sinclair made his entire career about pointing out all of the horrible things that happened. But the fact is, it was better than what came before. You could argue, because
and also it's an adjustment period. So I mean, it's never it's never going to be optimal for everyone at the same time.
I agree, and I think one of the things that is going to continue to be a struggle for a while. There's always a cultural lag, right? And as you point out, a lot of the things we're talking about have been around for a long time. And now they're just getting better. You're going to see things like that great accountant who could scale him or herself. That's going to be a really interesting phenomenon, because I do think that is definitely going to happen. But on the other side of it, like, watch what people do, right? Don't watch what they say. Don't watch what they complain about. Don't watch any of that. Watch what they actually do. And when you watch what they actually do, you can see your thesis makes a tremendous amount of sense, right? They don't have to know the Uber theory that information is going to be much more important.
They can even hate it when they hear about it, and
exactly. And so the Pareto distributions, I mean, like the 80-20, as you pointed out, it's like becoming much more 95-5, 99-1. Talk a little bit about, the AI revolution. As you know, I'm an investor in AI. I'm the chairman of the board of Stability AI. I personally think that it is a incredible technology, not without problems. I am not glossing about it, but it's going to revolutionize what people can do if they can scale. And AI lets them scale, in my opinion, because it removes a tremendous amount of the repetitive tasks and lets you focus on the creativity, lets you focus on the new ideas, lets you focus on the things that I would argue, are better for human minds to be focusing on anyway, right? And yet, I also think it allows for what we see as mass customization
Mhm.
emerging, right?
Yeah.
I will do something just for you. Why can I do that? Because it's easy for me to do it.
Mhm.
Because it's a digital asset, and my cost of replication is effectively zero.
Yeah.
And so can I tweak it by making use of the data that all of these other users are showing me? Yeah, you bet I can. Talk a bit about how you see that unfolding, this ability for like best in class to scale themselves. And it almost out of necessity is going to come about, in my opinion, and I think yours, I don't want to speak for you, but in a very non-linear fashion, whereas we've been so used to that kind of linear climb the ladder of
Yeah.
success, et cetera.
So one, I feel like more than anything, it's just like so exciting, everything that's happening now. I haven't been this excited since like 1995 when I was a teenager and like going on the internet, and every week there's like a new tool, and you get like a CD with the magazine, and you try it, and freeware, and it's like, so there's just like so many cool things happening. And I think anyone who's not like really diving into it or excited about it is really missing out. So I encourage everyone who hasn't started yet playing with all of these tools to start. Um, I think technology, and here too, it's both the internet and AI, each one on its own and both together, is going to enable us to scale in ways that were not possible before. And it's going to enable us to do that in professions that previously were considered completely unscalable. So 120 years ago, I think Alfred Marshall, who was like the Paul Krugman of the day, or let's say, or something, the most kind of influential and vocal economist, let's say, obviously like Krugman, not necessarily always correct, but or even a negative indicator, but it's a tangent. But Marshall wrote about all these new business people that are making a lot of money suddenly because of I think the telegraph and the trains. But he looked at the best paid singer in Europe that summer, and he said that singer will never make as much money as a businessman so long as the human voice is restricted to a single room. So he said like music is inherently an unscalable occupation compared to like a lawyer or like a merchant. But of course, not soon after, we had radio and recording and television. Of course, music, Taylor Swift can make $1 billion a year now. And I feel like there's many other professions that we cannot imagine how scalable they can be, but we're about to be seriously surprised. And some of that happens because the same work suddenly becomes scalable, so you can suddenly reach many more people concurrently. But some of it also happens because the work itself changes, or kind of the substitutions that emerge that you didn't think exist. So, when suddenly a Peloton instructor can have a class with 200 people, and it's not like a video of a class, it's a live class. He or she shout out to different people. Like people feel like they're interacting. And again, maybe the limit is 50 people, maybe it's 250, but it's not one anymore. And it's not 10 or whatever is the average size of a class at a gym. And then suddenly a Peloton instructor makes $600,000 a year, while the average New York gym instructor makes $40,000 a year. Already you're starting to see something interesting happening. So again, without becoming Taylor Swift, just like, okay, this person makes 12 times as much as that person, even though they're kind of doing the same job and they're in the same place. So I think AI will enable us to leverage our skills much more. So again, to do more with our time, to serve more people concurrently, to even let people interact with our knowledge and our voice while we are not there, to match, and maybe that's the most important aspect, to match us algorithmically with the people who are most likely to pay the most for whatever that we're selling at that given moment. So you said the internet is like a variance enhancer, and it's also a matching engine at the end of the day. And economic activity is all about matching. So if someone wants to hear the specific thing that I know about right now on Earth, and you can match me to that person, often that person would want to pay much more than the average person who just kind of needs my advice. And you can see that in medical examples. If God forbid, you have, I don't know what, some disease, and you can speak to the second best expert in the world, or you can pay an extra $10,000 and speak right now, but only on Zoom, to the best expert in the world. Will you pay the $10,000 for 10 minutes? You would. Would you do that even if the number 2 expert would be completely free? Yes, you would. And even though the number 2 would meet you and touch you and do everything, and the other one would be only on Zoom, you would do that because, again, if the match is really true, then it's worth it. And sometimes it's worth much more. And I think that's true in more and more situations. And both the internet and AI together basically enable us to do that matching. And they enable work itself to become much more kind of ad hoc, contingent. Instead of like hoarding talent or having all the people or all the resources that you might need, you can suddenly tap into many more things on demand. And we're seeing that borne out in the data in terms of how big companies operate already. The bigger they are, the more dependent they are on freelancers and contingent labor of various kinds. And the boundaries of the firm itself become less and less clearly defined because transaction costs have changed significantly and are constantly changing because of the internet and AI and other tools. Which means we're moving into a world where 2 people with more or less the same skills, one of them could make 50 times more than the other. So if today maybe it's like 20 times more than the other because of luck, suddenly the role of luck or chance becomes much, much bigger. And sometimes the difference is all because, again, timing, an algorithm, someone was at the right place at the right time, 10 people liked someone tweet at the right time of day, so that thing ended up having 5 million views, and then the other person posted it 3 minutes later, and then just Elon just tweeted something stupid about something else, so nobody noticed, and all the attention in the world went in a different direction for 2 minutes. These are the type of things that will govern our lives. But even that winner will struggle to maintain their advantage probably in a lot of cases. Especially if they remain ambitious, maybe they'll make enough money quickly to live off of. But if they want to stay successful and retain that attention, it'll be very hard for them to do that. And it will affect more and more professions. We can have now remote surgery and remote collaboration on hardware development in more and more jobs that previously we thought people cannot do remotely. Now they can. And also those kind of levers of scalability, there's several of them and they multiply each other. So again, in the case of like a doctor, you could say, yeah, okay, so he could see some remote clients a few times a day, but it still doesn't make him Taylor Swift. But actually, if you see 10 patients a day instead of 6, that's already something. If you have to spend a little less time with each of them, that's already something. If you can give each of them a little more extra service or get like a little more hands-on remotely as tools become better, then you can take on more types of work. And more importantly, that matching effect, that the people that you will see are going to pay you 3 times more than the people you saw before. So now you're seeing more people, you can sell them more services, and you can charge them more. So maybe you're making 30 times more than you did before without becoming Taylor Swift, just by working more or less in the same way. But there's a multiple here suddenly that changed things. Again, not to the stratosphere, but dramatically enough for a person. And of course, even if it's only 2x or 3x, it's a big difference for a person that is just doing their job. And at the same time, it might come at the expense of the other person who's competing with you, who's now getting less work, or has to compete at least much more fiercely than before, and not just rely on the people who live near their office or their clinic or their school, and assume that they have a captive audience. So everyone has an audience now, but no one has a captive audience anymore. And it's true for cities, for companies, for individuals, for everyone. We all have to convince everybody else to pay us attention and to choose us every day. So capitalism on steroids, and let's see how that feels.
And it's funny that the name of the paper that made it AI really exponentially jump was attention is all you need.
Yeah. They didn't mean that, but like they didn't mean it in that sense, but it's true.
No, yeah. I know. Part of our thesis it seems to be similar to yours in that we see the corporations of the future as kind of managing what some others have called smart swarms. Mm-hmm. In other words, independent agents who are not like, so at O'Shaughnessy Ventures, one of our verticals is a filmmaking company. Mm-hmm. And we anticipate that it will probably rarely be the same exact team that makes the first film,
Right.
that makes the second film, right? And that will be that matching function that you bring up. I think people don't think about that, or when they do think about it, they don't take it to its natural conclusion, right?
Yeah.
The matching function is so important, and it's gotten so much better that you can have a situation where, the whole idea of, oh, I'm going to grind it out, or I'm going to, whatever, is being lost because skill sets are going to replace grind in many circumstances, I think.
Yeah.
But I also wonder, like, with this tsunami of new thinking, of new things, new strange experiments, as you point out, leading to really cool innovations and things. Do you think that the idea that the gatekeepers won't go away, but that they will be replaced by essentially people who have better taste or better ability to say, yeah, here's your platform, your curated platform
Mhm.
of like, here's the best doctor, here's the best teacher. Is that the way this unfolds?
Yeah, totally. I think one, the kind of film production or Hollywood example is a perfect one, and I also use it often. When you look at the credits at the end of a film, you realize, and sometimes a film is a big economic endeavor. It could be a 200 million, $500 million project that takes a few years. So it's a real business. It's not like some people having fun. And you have hundreds of people sometimes, some of them completely freelancers, some of them work for separate companies with extremely weird and exotic titles and specializations. And exactly, they're matched together. And you ask yourself, okay, why don't do all these people just work for the same company? And then there's, I think, two main reasons. One is matching, that you always want the best person for that specific job. And you cannot employ all the designers and all the script writers in the world at any given moment. And second is this financial hedge from both the participants and the producers, where, it's risky enough, that endeavor, that you don't want to add to your risk. So you really only pay for what you need when you need it, because otherwise the economics wouldn't make sense. But even from the kind of provider, from the provider's perspective, whether you're a writer or a designer or contributor to the film, you want to work on multiple projects in parallel, because you don't know which one of them is actually going to succeed or work or be worth your while or actually come into fruition. So it's both parties adapted, like both the capital and the labor, let's say, adapted to the dynamism and the complexity of the environment by adopting that arrangement, which I guess is optimal for that business. And I think the same thing will be true for other businesses. And yeah, that matching, the power of matching is something that even me, that I live on the internet, I still feel I underestimate it. When I teach a course about AI or about crypto, I'm not the world's greatest expert on either of these topics, and I don't claim to be. And my audience wants to learn from me, because those specific 500 people or 1,000 people a year that I teach, they want to learn from me because they like, again, my approach. They like my, the fact that I am not an expert, that I'm an outsider, that I don't have a dog in this race, that I'm just curious. Whatever it is that they like to learn about it from me, and they're willing to pay a premium to learn from someone who's not an expert and who's not as well known as somebody else. So again, it's not just that they're willing, that I'm a poor substitute for someone else, but they're paying a premium to learn specifically from me, to learn something that maybe they can just go on YouTube and learn, or just, or whatever, or go even on university. It'll be cheaper than coming to me and taking that course. So, and I think those matches are infinite. There's so many more of them. And yeah, the nature of the firm is changing, but also increasingly the whole economy is more clearly becoming a system that produces things. So it's not even about the firm anymore. It's about encouraging multiple firms to compete and to try things, and assuming that more of them will fail. So just like the venture model, but like on a broader scale, I think we're going to see more of that. Like, kind of venture is eating the economy. Like, more and more things will become, more ventures will become riskier, less clear, but also more scalable in some ways. And I also think, maybe this is a positive way to think about it, that it's true for individuals as well. So from a lot of what I just described about the future of work, it's very easy to conclude that, like, okay, we shouldn't care so much about public education or healthcare, most people don't matter anymore. Who cares about them? They're not necessary economically anymore. But actually, that's not true. And in a way, exactly the opposite is true. We as an economy don't know anymore who is going to be the next big talent, who is going to be the amazing person who's going to come up with something, whether it's a medical innovation or it's entertainment. But who is that person that by making the most of their skills and by getting a stage and getting attention is suddenly going to create incredible value for the world and jobs to a lot of other people. So we actually have to increase the number of bets that we make on people as well. We have to make sure that all of our people, have the skills and education and the opportunity to participate in this game, because it's basically more free lottery tickets for society at large. The more people we have, like every person is a lottery ticket, just like every tweet is a lottery ticket. And if we give more of them a chance, we basically increase our odds as a society that, that amazing thing will be created and invented. So I think it's true. And also I think that's the right way to think about it as a society, even if it weren't true, that we have to find ways to explain to ourselves why all people are valuable, why we should, even though there's these kind of tendencies toward inequality and power laws that are a result of our level of technological development, why it's more important than ever for us to make sure that everyone has, great education, great housing, great economic safety, and that they're all willing to take more risk and take bolder bets and to try to do whatever it is that they're good at or that they enjoy doing, and that something good will come out of it for all of us.
Yeah, and again, we are very simpatico there because we have another thing that we do, fellowship grants. And what we do is we award 12 a year for $100,000. We're actually we already launched and we'll be making more complete a smaller grant program where we give smaller awards. But the idea behind it was very much in the spirit of what you just said. In other words, in the past, I had no ability to find and fund people with genius ideas and or whatever, because if they weren't in my immediate circle, right, that was I didn't know them, and not only that, but how many humans were born, lived, and died that were geniuses or incredibly creative and didn't even know it themselves because of where they found themselves in physically in space. So I love that idea that the unlock really comes, and you use the example from biology where the few ants that go off in looking for the new food, they're very important because they find the new food source.
Yeah, you don't know which one of them is going to bump into some source that suddenly becomes relevant for the whole system. Yeah,
exactly. And that's why this idea that what we're able to do is leverage that, because it can be fed immediately back into the network. When somebody, like you talked about, it's the crazy kid who puts up the video and he's got 1 billion views, right? That is incredibly information rich and is a signal.
Yeah.
And the way things are evolving, those signals are incredibly important to people who want to continually improve what they're offering to the public. Let me ask you this. What have you achieved as a researcher that has helped you scale using AI, using the various tools? What's been your personal experience?
So even before AI, just the internet as a whole, everything I've done in life always started from writing online. So starting from the mid-90s, I was writing about music, and then I started promoting parties and meeting all the club owners, just from being some guy under a pseudonym that writes about music online and kind of reviews parties. And so already it seemed amazing to me. Then, I was writing about consumer culture in China, and I started working in real estate development in China and building shopping malls just because I was a guy writing on the internet about, the Chinese media and brands and culture. And then what I'm doing now, it's all based around my newsletter at the end of the day. So, I get to advise the biggest companies in the world, and I get to give paid talks, and I get to teach people from the biggest companies in the world. And all just because I'm some guy somewhere that's writing a newsletter. in terms of how I use AI, so again, the matching engine and the internet have served me well and stressed me out too. But I mean, they allowed me, I left my corporate job 8 years ago in real estate private equity, and since then I managed to survive and then even thrive, and I buy a house and I have 2 kids and a wife, and so yeah, again, I still worry, but I probably worry more than I should, given I think I'm doing okay. And in terms of AI, so for me in particular, the main thing is that it's really like the colleague I never had. It's not about like, oh, someone's going to do everything instead of me, but like bouncing ideas, criticize me, remind me of that thing that I read somewhere. Is that McLuhan, or is it like something like, where did I find that quote? Like someone said something about a horse and like a thing, like it's like a lot of stuff like that. And also just a lot of feedback. Okay, is this good? How can I make it better? Criticize it, steelman it, etc. So, and then even with just writing, generating a lot of segues is like a place that I get stuck in. I'm like, oh, I have all the pieces, but how do I connect this to the other? I'm just missing like 3 words here, or a sentence, or like something blank something. So stuff like that I could spend 3 hours on, or just give up for the day and come back the next day previously. Now I'm just like, okay, let's see what ChatGPT says about this. And then again, I use all the also like Claude and Bard and ChatGPT and Perplexity and the image generators. So I use it throughout the day, all the time, just as I write and think. Then I use the text to audio. I use 11 Labs to create audio versions of all my articles. And that's like a very simple thing that I just wouldn't do before, like couldn't be bothered to record it. Like, so I would do it every now and then, but now I do it for every article, and it's easy. I use Midjourney for image generation. So again, every article and everything I write, I always create an image now. And I'm toying with a lot of the data analysis tools as well. So both the research tools like Cite and Elicit and Perplexity, to actually find information that is properly sourced. I use some of the kind of data analysis thing. I like the Notable plugin for ChatGPT. So you can upload like really heavy files to Notable and then interact with them via ChatGPT, but like process more data than ChatGPT itself would be willing to process. So yeah, so I can't say that like there's anything that kind of allows me not to do anything anymore, but like it allows me to have those multipliers, to do a little bit more every day, to do it a little faster, to do it a little better, and to match a little better with the relevant people that are most interested in it. Yeah. And also I think to have more fun, it's so inspiring and exciting, just like all these new toys. I'm also kind of happy with myself that I'm still excited about them and still get them, that I'm not getting old yet, because obviously I'm younger than you, but also I feel like I've been on the internet for 20 years now, and you always kind of wait for the thing that you'll be like, okay, I have no idea what this is. Like, why are people using this? So, and I get that feeling with with Snapchat. I think the first product that I kind of looked at and said, oh, okay, this is not something, this is the first social media that I'm not going to use. So it means I'm getting, that was a few years ago already. But with AI, I kind of only feel again that, okay, there's so many cool things. And it's also, I feel like so many people, we're talking about AI, but so many people still don't get the internet. They still don't, not just that they don't make the most of it, they just, even things like a search engine, so many people just don't use it properly yet, or use it enough. Like often people ask me, oh, how do you know about this? How do you know about that? I'm like, I just went and read about it. How do I know? Yeah, but how do you know it's true? And like what, just basic research methods online to figure out what's true and what's not true, and where to find, how to verify and validate sources. So yeah, I feel like there's still so much potential that people are not taking advantage of. And even with AI, a lot of the argument is about what it could become and how much better can it be. But I feel like with what we have now, just to propagate that into the rest of the economy and to adapt it to different use cases, that's you can run with that for the next 20 years, even if they don't invent anything else. And they will invent. So yeah, so I mean, incredibly exciting.
I agree. I feel like one of the luckiest people on the planet in the fact that I get to be alive during this time.
Yeah.
Because it is so exciting. And one of the things that you point out as well is that, between the combination of mobile cameras, high-speed internet, everyone having a smartphone, the technical competence that was once required has become obsolete, really, because anyone who can figure out how to use a smartphone can suddenly let their ideas run wild. And so we're seeing a period, in my opinion, and I think in yours, correct me if I'm wrong, where the ideas are going to take prominence over the technical proficiency.
Yeah. So the execution barrier now for a lot of things is just much lower than it was before. I will not say it doesn't exist. Actually, one thing I didn't mention that I do with AI, I do more coding now than I did. I have some basic proficiency. I used to, I started as a front-end developer and building websites when there were 5 HTML tags in the world, and it was really simple. But now my kind of basic proficiency or affinity allows me to tweak many more of the tools that I use much more intensively than I would have. So both my website, instead of going through Substack, I have a kind of an open source Ghost website, and I customize the template, and I integrated all sorts of tools. So each one of these things is a little thing, but it's a little thing that I wouldn't have done before, or that I would have had to depend on a team to do. And also automating a lot of stuff behind the scene with Zapier in particular, but now with Zapier and API calls to OpenAI. So again, in terms of filtering emails and sending people invoices automatically and welcoming students to the course, a lot of stuff that even a year ago I had someone kind of do them, now I can kind of get by without anyone else doing them, and just automating part of them and kind of doing a bit more of them myself, just because it still excites me, because it's new and it's kind of fun and I like to build it. Probably I'm going to get tired of it at some point. But I think, yeah, so I agree. I think now a person with an idea can also be a person with a website, with some complex coding of accounting flows, with building basic tools or examples or interactive charts, whatever it is that your field requires. But I can now have a much richer kind of presence thanks to all of these tools. Where in the past, I would either have to depend on someone else or just give that up altogether and just know, okay, this is not in my league. I'm just one person, so I cannot expect to have all of these other extra perks that maybe only a bigger company could have. But now I can, basically punch above my weight. And I think, the issue is that everyone can punch above their weight now. So
that's the great way of putting it. Yeah. I think that these tools give everyone the ability to punch way above their weight. And the functions that the traditional corporations served prior to all of these innovations are disappearing because they are being made much more efficient, much more usable, actually, where it allows someone like yourself to create a juggernaut, really, of a company and person that can consult, give classes, do a variety of things, basically from the same knowledge base that can be extended through a variety of different distribution patterns.
By the way, it's funny, speaking of matching, so I'm getting really tired of social media, partly because of the Elon stories, but just I almost feel like, one, it's very important for my work, but also I feel like I can do it without it, just by sending. I have enough of an audience now just on the newsletter where I can just write, not tweet, not post anything, and just leave it to other people to discuss. And I want to see how that's going to work. Both because it distracts me and I spend way more time on social media than I would like. But also I feel like it focuses me too much on the present, on short-term things. And I think where I have a bigger advantage is kind of moving a little more slowly and thinking a little more broadly. So I don't want it to I don't want to know everything that's going on, even if it's valuable information in a way. And it's funny, I was just thinking okay, maybe I'll take a break from Twitter for a few months or something. And that same day, I kind of came back just to see what's going on. And I saw that Paul Millard responded to your tweet recommending me to come on this podcast. I'm oh, this damn matching machine. I can't avoid it. It's so valuable.
That is something that I have believed for a long time. I started saying years ago that Twitter Twitter is right now, still the best candidate to emerge as the world's first always-on global intelligence network
Yeah,
and
I would
matching.
pay $1,000 a month to use Twitter, literally.
Totally agree.
Unfortunately.
Exactly. And I append my statement the same way. Unfortunately, because it is the power of that network is difficult to calculate. And
I mean, it's the
you
essence
point,
of the internet. It's so simple
truly,
and
truly,
yeah.
truly. And yet you also talk about the tragedy of the uncommon. Talk a little bit about that idea.
Oh, I've written all these articles that you read. I have to catch up on them. But so there's this idea in economics, the tragedy of the commons. It comes from kind of environmental studies, but later kind of into mainstream economics. And the basic idea is that, if you let everyone just follow their best interest, there's a lot of common resources that are basically going to get depleted or destroyed. We spoke about fishing. If everyone would just want to go fishing every day and just try to catch one fish, the lake might kind of go below the level at which the local population can replace itself, and there's not going to be any more fish to anyone else. And that's very easy to understand, right? The low humans, they're greedy, they want everything, so they destroy things. But I think there's kind of the counterexample of that. I called it the tragedy of the uncommon. Later, I found out that there's also another name for it. Like Tyler Cowen actually sent me something about it. I sent stuff to him because I know that he knows everything. So if someone already said it before, it's even better than ChatGPT. You're like, Tyler, did anyone write this? And he's like, oh yeah, what's his name? Late in his career, he wrote an article about. So I think they call it. How do they call it? I don't remember. Something also with comments. But basically, the idea is I think there are things that become less valuable because they're underutilized. So they're basically lost to society because they're underutilized. And I gave some examples of the lack of public beaches in the US and the fact that so many of our beaches, or most of our beaches, at least where people live, are private. And that means not just that, okay, it's not nice that, most people don't have access to a beach, but that even people who do have access to the beach in those private communities actually don't enjoy the beach because the beach is not fun. It doesn't have enough economic activity to sustain the kind of things that make a beach fun. There's not a good restaurant, there's no activity, there's no people to look at, whatever it is. And I kind of thought about it because I was in Israel this summer and I brought my mother-in-law, who is like American and Swiss, and we're on the beach every day for like a month. And the beaches in Israel are like a never-ending party. They're always full of people, and there's always nice restaurants, and there's always music. It's like amazing. And she's like, why don't we have that in America? Like, what? We don't have enough people or something? I'm like, in America, they don't let people, like, there's no public beaches, so they don't have that. And where they do have public beaches in America, they're too public in a way. So they're like government run. There's like some government kind of concession for the food. So by definition, it's probably not good, or like went through some corrupt process, or at least it's kind of like the lowest common denominator. It's not interesting. So I think, this strategy of the uncommon, where I feel like too many of our shared resources maybe are not open enough to the public and for people to experiment with and to do stuff with. And of course, you can say that about online resources and about a lot of other things. So yeah, that was the idea there.
Yeah, and I think though
that the thing, if you share more with people, your stuff will become more valuable. Even if you're rich and have a private beach, it'll be more fun for you, not just more fun for the people that you let in, and more valuable for you.
Exactly, and I think that it really supports your thesis about, we get hidebound sometimes about what a job is.
Yeah.
And I think we're approaching a time, and I think your work supports it, where your vocation can be the same as your avocation.
Yeah.
And boy, that seems like a much more good trade to me. And where we have this platform where, to use the analogy that is imperfect, but it's like we're providing a lot more access to those beaches, right? Because people can log on and you're going to meet things and encounter things that you wouldn't have otherwise. And it's just more fun.
Yeah, but it's still scary, A lot of people, they just want a simple answer, like what should I study, where should I work, what that's I wrote about it. Packy, I think mutual friend Packy McCormick, he wrote about the great online game, about like some of what we discussed, that opportunity now on the internet for everyone to become so big. And I think that the issue with that game is that there's this game going on, but now everyone is forced to play that game. Even people who don't, they don't want to play that game. They don't want to like follow their passion so much, or just like they just want to, have a stable life and quiet, and also maybe they don't want the kind of hustle for money to be the center of their attention all day. They just want to have that boring job, and they want to do other things or think about other things, not about how to make myself economically useful at any given moment. So I mean, it will require some adjustment. I think one thing we haven't discussed is kind of the not even a backlash, but the counter movements or counter trends. I think we'll also see a lot of that, like more people that build physical, intentional communities of various kinds, and of course, online communities as well. And once people are liberated from the office and they can choose where to work based on other things, I mean, those other things will really be much more about, okay, what kind of people do I want to live around, and what kind of lifestyle do I want, and culture. And again, even religion, both existing and the new ones that will be invented probably in this century in response to all those things that are happening. We'll see a lot of efforts to disconnect from this game, or to play a different game, and to, like, again, not to be at the mercy of these algorithms all the time. Both as communities, but even just, within the single household, just like families maybe both becoming less important and more important at the same time, I guess, in the world. And I think we'll see both. But for those that family is becoming more important, I think it can be nicer than ever, because now really you can have more time to spend with your family and dedicate time to your kids and be more involved in their education, and kind of really turn it into something that you dedicate a lot of the energy that previously went into your work to that. We'll just see a more variety of lifestyles in general, I guess. Which opportunity in itself.
Yeah, which I think is actually diversity, is actually cognitive diversity, especially, is rewarded. It's one of the reasons why I think that, like, I'm a big supporter of open source models in AI, because they allow for the cognitive diversity to really have a maximum effect, right? And so I think that well, it can be daunting and it can be scary for many. I think that you're right, that you can check out the great online game if you want to, as you mentioned with these counter movements. I support,
but even that is scary now. Again, you get the FOMO. Sure. You get like, oh, am I moving backwards? Am I out of touch with the times?
Sure.
Can I live without tweeting every day? Will people remember me in a week when I come back from vacation? It sounds funny, but you really feel that when in real time, like, oh, how the world is going to move on without me. So.
One of the things that I have found, though, is, as part of our fellowships and grants program, I supported a young artist here in Manhattan who did exactly that. He had no online footprint at all, intentionally.
Yeah.
And he had a gallery downtown, and they did their first show. And the only way you could find out about that show was to hear about it from a friend or see one of the very limited flyers that they put in art schools. 250 people showed up. And so I think that, to me, great. That's just another way. If you want to go that way, good for you. Great. And so I think that, it can be daunting. Like, one of the reasons I changed my opinion about universal basic income is that we are now in a phase where people who, through no fault of their own, I always underline that, through no fault of their own, maybe don't want to play the great online game. And since that's the way the world is working, I know all the arguments against UBI.
Yeah.
And I used to be opposed to it because those arguments made sense to me. But now I'm kind of like, we got to give it a try. Do you agree?
I think, I don't know if UBI specifically, I'm not against it, but I'm not sure if this is the answer we're looking for.
Right.
I definitely think we need whole new social systems and radical ideas. Like one thing I wrote about is, I call it the National Success Fund, which is basically, again, we have these kind of power law effects. I give full credit to people who are successful, but we also know that a lot of chance goes into it, particularly the chance in terms of the magnitude. Like, okay, you deserve it, but like being 50x is good enough. You don't have to be a million x than the average person. And I think we should start, particularly the US, should start treating innovation the way Norway treats oil. To say, okay, we have this thing. It definitely generates enough for everyone. It also has the potential to corrupt our institutions, which it is doing already. And I'm not saying corrupt in terms of bribing politicians, but basically in terms of like California, saying, oh, we get all these taxes, so now we can just become so sclerotic in terms of how everything else we do works. And we know that the goose is going to keep laying eggs, even though the schools are terrible and healthcare is terrible for most people. So I think we should take a bigger chunk of those windfalls and put them in some fund that is not under the direct control of politicians. So it is a government institution of some sorts, but it doesn't serve the people who are now currently in power, but it has a different mandate that is more long-term, both to invest it just so it grows and we still have enough of it, so the government doesn't run deficits, again, doesn't become California and just says, oh, we have money now, let's just, go out of control. But also to reinvest it into various public goods, So again, let's have great education, let's have great healthcare, let's have better infrastructure, trains, housing, whatever it is that we need, reinvest it back into society. So in a way, I'm trying to come to universal basic income from the other direction of like creating a world where you don't need income. Like, you have
Right.
education, you have healthcare, you have a place to live. Now go do your thing. So, and also it doesn't feel like you're getting a handout or you're part of someone, like, you left the game, or like you just live in a place that that it's okay to try something and fail, or it's okay to try less than someone else. And yeah, so.
Yeah, I think,
and even that, I don't think that's the end idea, but I think these are things that we have to think about right now. There's no doubt that it's time to think about them and to discuss them. So yeah,
could not agree more. And I've studied that idea as well, and I like that idea too. The idea, because it also serves if your goal is more innovation, better things for more people, etc., then rewarding everyone in a, let's say, just we'll keep it at the country level right now. Like if the United States is really, really good at innovation and really good at ideas, there should be kind of a national dividend for its citizens that, inspires people who are going to be really innovative to say, ooh, I want to go live there. Right.
Yeah. And then you get into immigration policy and it becomes,
exactly.
You have issues there as well. But Americans don't understand how wealthy this country is. I mean, even compared to Europe, and let alone, it's just, I grew up in Israel when it was a developing country, socialist country, kind of, it was still a nice place to live. But we had two types of cars. Everyone lived in more or less the same kind of area. There's some rich kids, so like, I don't know, they live in like the upper floor of the building where everyone else lived in. And some guy was really rich, so the elevator even opened up directly to the living room, which was, I remember seeing it when I was 10. I was like, wow, this is like, like the Bat Cave or something. It's like the craziest thing I've ever seen. And just, again, we have so much here, and there's really enough for everyone, while still having enough people that will have much more than everyone else. And, while keeping the incentives there to continue to innovate, particularly for America. I think, it attracts people that want more, and it's good that they do and that they're ambitious, and it's going to continue to do that. So I don't think we should be scared about messing up the incentives. And I think the incentives argument usually comes at the expense of really people that barely even have a chance. That it's not, the issue is not, oh, I'm going to take away the incentives of this person to succeed. I mean, I think we can be better than that. And we can be a little meaner maybe to the successful people and, worry about their incentives. But I think everyone deserves a decent house and healthcare and education. And we're definitely already in a position to offer that. And I hope and believe that in 10 years we'll be in an even better position. So
totally agree. And I think that's a great positive and optimistic note to end our conversation on. This has been incredibly fun for me.
Likewise.
Because it's just, I just love talking about this stuff with smart people, and you are certainly one of those. So tell
likewise, it's fun. I'm usually asked about narrower things and more short-term things, and I'm like, oh, just ask me about this other thing that like I wrote about. You did. Thank you for that.
Of course, it's my pleasure. Tell our audience where they can find you the most easy. Obviously on Twitter, but how do they find your? So
my website and newsletter is drorpoleg.com. I probably need to find something that sounds better on podcasts and easier to remember, but it's drorpoleg.com.
And we will have that, of course, in the show notes. We always ask all of our guests at the end a question, because we'd love to hear the variety of answers to it. And that is that we're going to wave a wand and make you the emperor of the world for a day. You can't kill anyone, and you can't put anyone in a re-education camp. But what you can do, we're going to hand you a magical microphone, and you can speak two things into it that will incept the entire 8 billion population of the world. And whenever their tomorrow is, wherever they are, they're going to wake up and they're going to say, I just had two of the greatest ideas, and I'm going to act on them right away. What are you going to incept people to act on right away?
Oh, it's a big responsibility. Test your assumptions and be a little kinder than what you feel like being.
Oh, I love those. I especially love be a little kinder.
So, the assumptions is good for business, and the other one is good for sharing whatever comes out of it.
And good for society. Those are great ones. Thank you so much for your time and for being on. I hope to have you back on again, because even looking at my notes, I didn't even get through half of it.
Let's do it.
You are very predictive, and I love your work. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jim. I appreciate it. See you soon.